Today we're diving into the mind of one of history's most important thinkers, Al-Farabi. They called him the second teacher, right after Aristotle. Now, he lived in a time of total political chaos, and right in the middle of all that mess, he came up with this idea of a perfect society, the virtuous city. So, let's get into it. I mean, really think about that question. That's what Al-Farabi was wrestling with. We're talking the 10th century, and the once great Abbasid Caliphate was basically falling apart. It was a world of chaos and instability. So how did he think we could fix it? And more importantly, was his solution a workable plan or just an impossible dream? To really get Al-Farabi's vision, you've got to understand the world he was living in. The political unity of the Islamic world shattered. The real power wasn't with the caliph in Baghdad anymore. Oh no, it was in the hands of local warlords. It's against this backdrop of decay that Al-Farabi dreamed up his radical idea for a perfect state. He called it Al-Medina al-Fadila, the virtuous city. And his central idea was honestly revolutionary. Get this. He saw the state not as some kind of machine, but as a living, breathing organism, a healthy body where every single part has a job to do, and they all work together in perfect harmony for the good of the whole. And that right there, that brings us to the huge debate about his work, a debate that's still going on today. Was this beautiful idea of the virtuous city a practical blueprint you could actually use to govern? Or was it just a philosopher's fantasy, completely disconnected from the messy reality of politics? So for the rest of this explainer, we're going to dive into these two completely opposite ways of looking at it. On one side, you have the people who say it's a beautiful but totally unachievable ideal. And on the other, you've got those who believe it offers real practical steps for building a just society. Let's kick things off with the most controversial piece of this whole puzzle, the city's leader. Because for Al-Farabi, absolutely everything, and I mean everything, hinged on the person in charge. In his body analogy, the ruler is the heart. It's pretty simple, right? If the heart is strong and virtuous, the whole body, the whole state thrives. But if that heart is weak or corrupt, well, the state gets sick, and eventually, it dies. The health of the entire system literally rests on the shoulders of one person. And this is exactly where the utopian dream argument just lights up. Al-Farabi laid out 12 incredibly tough conditions for this ruler. And we're not talking simple stuff. We're talking physical perfection, an absolutely flawless memory, an off-the-charts intellect, and, get this, a direct connection to what he called the active intellect. Think of that as being plugged into some kind of universal divine intelligence. No big deal, right? So yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who on earth could possibly check all of those boxes? Critics say this whole checklist is so impossibly high that no actual human being could ever pull it off. It feels like the whole system is built on a person who might not even exist. But hold on, because the practical blueprint camp has a really smart answer for that. They argue that Al-Farabi wasn't being literal. Those 12 conditions, they weren't a rigid job description. They were a goal, an ideal to strive for. And he was pragmatic, too. He knew a single perfect person might be impossible to find, so he had a backup plan, a council of rulers who, together, had all those virtues. Okay, so let's zoom out from the ruler and see how this whole debate plays out when we look at the structure of the state itself and how it stacks up against the real world. A fascinating way to look at this is to compare him to Plato. In Plato's Republic, he said rulers shouldn't have private property or even families, because that would lead to corruption. But Al-Farabi, he said, no, that's not it. He allowed his rulers to have both. He believed real unity in a society comes from people needing each other, not from forcing them to give everything up. His supporters say this is a much more realistic take on human nature. But that realism immediately opens up a huge can of worms, right? If you let rulers have their own money and look out for their own families, aren't you just paving the way for them to put themselves before the public good? I mean, how do you stop them from just enriching themselves? It's a classic problem. And this criticism gets way more intense when you remember what was actually happening in Al-Farabi's time. Power wasn't held by philosopher kings. It was held by military strongmen, guys with armies, like the Buyaids, or Al-Farabi's own boss, Saif al-Dawla. In a world run by the sword, how could a complex philosophical system based on virtue ever work? It seems like a beautiful idea that just had no place in reality. But the practical camp fires right back. They say, look, Al-Farabi wasn't some clueless academic in an ivory tower. He was a sharp political analyst. He studied the broken states all around him, and he even categorized them into what he called ignorant cities, cities driven by greed or power or just basic survival. So the virtuous city wasn't just a dream, it was a tool, a critical mirror he held up to the corrupt politics of his time to show them exactly how they were failing. So, in the end, we're left with this really deep and complicated debate with really strong points on both sides. Al-Farabi's legacy isn't some simple answer. It's a profound conversation that's still going on. So let's just break it down one last time. The utopian view says the ruler's standards are just way too high, and the whole idea ignores how power really works in the world. But the practical view says, no, those standards are a goal, and Al-Farabi's model is actually more realistic than Plato's, giving us a moral compass for how to create laws. Maybe the point isn't to pick a winner. Maybe the real genius of Al-Farabi's Virtuous City is that it forces us to exist in that really uncomfortable but really important space between the world as it is and the world as it should be. It's a timeless challenge to try and close that gap between our reality and our ideals. And that leaves us with a question for our own time, over 1,000 years later. When we look for leaders today, what do we value more? Someone with a big, soaring, perfect vision for a better future? Or someone with a grounded, practical plan for the problems we face right now? Al-Farabi's work suggests we might just need both. Thanks for watching.